This is AMD Magnus, the APU slated to go into the next-gen Xbox, and it will be the largest APU used in a gaming console in history. Seriously, as covered in a leak a few months ago, it will total roughly 408 millimeters squared. That's about 13% larger than both the Xbox Series X and the Xbox One X's die size, and it is a 46% larger die than the monolithic one that will be used in the PlayStation 6 home console. So yeah, it should be stronger than the PS6. But at the same time, it will also be more expensive because of this larger size and its use of bridge dies and likely a larger RAM capacity compared to the PS6, at least if it wants to work well as a PC console hybrid. But you know what? That's okay, I think, because this time around, Xbox is going to be much more than a console. It should also be something that can run more than just Xbox apps and challenge the PC gaming market, at least somewhat directly. And although it is using a large, for a console, APU die, I will say that compared to PC mega APUs like Strix Halo, for example, it's actually a tad smaller. And therefore, yes, well, I don't see Xbox Magnus as likely being a direct competitor to the next-gen PlayStation console anymore due to how much more Magnus will cost to make than like the PS6. Compared to PC gaming systems, I actually think it will be much more favorable because yes, it will have bridge dies. That's more expensive than what the PS6 will use in a monolithic die, but it won't be that much more expensive. And yes, it will have 11 cores instead of the up to 9 cores in the PlayStation 6, but it's not insane. It's not like 12 or 16 cores like in a AMD Halo APU laptop. And in fact, the 11 cores that it will have a modest amount of L3 that cuts down on die size to save cost. And so I guess what I'm saying is that yes, Xbox Magnus is going to be pretty expensive from the perspective of a console. I think it will definitely cost more than $800. But even though it uses 3 nanometer, I don't think it needs to cost more than $1,200, certainly not more than $1,500 if Strix Halo laptops, which remember, those APUs are actually bigger than what's going to be in Magnus by a tad, those are supposedly going to cost $1,000 sooner. Those come with a screen and a battery and are this full mobile system that Xbox Magnus doesn't need to be. So I guess if you think of Xbox Magnus favorably, it's just going to depend on how you look at it. Do you see it as a true console? Okay, if that's how you see it, then it's kind of just like the GPD Win 5, a vanity device for those that want the absolute best performance in a console-like form factor. But what if you see it more as a gaming PC? Well, then this is going to be viewed, I believe, as a cost-optimized, mass-produced device that can potentially put a check on OEMs and pre-builts overcharging for their gaming desktops. Like, think about it. For example, let's say that Asus wants to sell you a pre-built with an RTX 4070 in it for $2,500. How could they possibly get away with something like that if there is an Xbox console out there that runs some version of full Windows 11 and actually has like RTX 5080 or better raster and possibly around RTX 5090 ray tracing performance? Well, the answer is Asus won't be able to get away with that anymore if there's an Xbox hybrid console that costs $1,200 or heck, again, even $1,500. This will spank OEMs and keep their prices and their greed in check, which is good for PC gamers. Now, if I sound all of a sudden excited about the future of Xbox, well, that's because, at least for right now, I am. And it's not the first time I have been, by the way. I was excited in the past about Xbox before when I thought they might do some pro gamer things, but then, in my opinion, they just ended up not doing those things. And that is what I think Magnus maybe could do once again by making their next-gen console a true hybrid design. It's what I've wanted them to do for a decade now. But until Magnus, whether Xbox fanboys get it or not, Microsoft has been at war with PC gamers, doing crappy things like artificially limiting which games hit PC, putting them on a console PC gamers might not want to buy, or slapping PC games with exhaustive Xbox DRM for absolutely no reason. If Microsoft cuts the crap and stops doing that sort of stuff, and then finally embraces what would be a bright future for the Xbox brand, that is a hybrid console device that runs some foolish form of Windows, then finally I believe Xbox will be doing truly pro gamer things. And seeing Microsoft actually show some apprehension to doubling down on their Xbox Game Pass price increases, that also hints to me, I must say, that they might not be giving up on the Xbox brand just yet, despite what a lot of people think, and that's for two reasons. First, the only reason Xbox would have slowed their plans to raise Game Pass prices in all regions is if they thought there were enough cancellations happening that this could kill Xbox for good before the next generation even launches. And what that means is that Xbox gamers really, really did make their voices heard. Microsoft noticed that, and therefore noticed that they still have an Xbox fan base that exists and is paying attention. Not all Xbox fans are gone. If they were, there wouldn't have been mass cancellations, and Xbox wouldn't have been forced to react in some degree. And so, second of all, they would only care about Xbox dying now and reacted to the mass cancellations if they really, really, really did actually want to launch a next generation still, and they didn't want to lose all momentum before that generation starts. Seriously, that is why those rumors of next gen being canceled, I think, might be wrong, at least as of now. Now, look, assuming those rumors aren't just entirely fake, which I don't know, all leakers out there, maybe those rumors were, I think recent rumors that have come out of next generation Xbox already being canceled are probably, if not fake, just some people getting their wires crossed with what's going on with the current gen versus the next gen. You see, I have already for months been talking about how I believe Xbox Series production has stopped. But that's because this generation has failed. That doesn't necessarily mean that Microsoft has entirely given up on launching Xbox branded consoles, right? And so I'll even go a bit further and remind you all that in a Broken Silicon that came out this week, I leaked that I had talked to people at AMD that were still working on Xbox Magnus. Now, I don't mean working on Xbox Magnus like a month ago, or they know people who talked about Xbox Magnus a month ago. I mean, these people are directly working on finalizing Xbox Magnus, and they were working on it as of last Friday. So I don't believe Xbox Magnus has been canceled, at least not as of now. And seeing that my sources are saying that it hasn't been canceled yet, seeing Microsoft respond to the negativity around raising Game Pass prices, that tells me they still probably want to launch another generation. But anyways, what will the full specs of Xbox Magnus look like? What will it be capable of? And well, I'm going to go over it. The full specs for the next generation Xbox and arguably mid-range gaming PC APU that you'll be able to get in 2027. But first, an ad from a sponsor. This piece of content is brought to you by CDkeyoffer.com. CDkeyoffer.com is really the best place to go to get reasonable pricing on Microsoft software, whether that's Windows 11 operating systems or Office products like the ones that I installed on this new Strix Halo laptop that I was testing while I made this ad. You see, I actually use CDkeyoffer.com. I've used them many times. My family members use them. My friends use them when they're building new PCs. And that's because they've been a reliable sponsor of Moore's Law is Dead for years now. And so if you're looking to get, say, a new laptop, or you just finally want to get a legitimate key of one of the latest Office products on your desktop during back to school, use CDkeyoffer.com's offer codes of Broken Silicon to save 25% on all Microsoft products. And then actually you can also use offer code DieShrink to save 3% on everything else on their website, like games as well. Once again, I want to thank CDkeyoffer.com for sponsoring this content, like all the other content that they've sponsored, and for making it easy for me to get a good price on Office on my new laptop. All right, now before I get to the full AMD Xbox Magnus specs, I do want to clear up a few things and make clear some important points beforehand, right? So first of all, I want to be clear about why I'm doing another Xbox Magnus leak, despite technically doing one a few months ago, and that's because that originally, it was just a bit messy, and I apologize for that. You see, if you actually go back and watch that video, you'll see that I originally was really 50-50 on if a Magnus APU was going to end up being for a PlayStation or an Xbox. And in fact, in that video, I chose to focus on the PlayStation 6 possibility simply because, well, if I wasn't sure, just being honest, I knew the PlayStation would get more clicks. And, well, It wasn't for PlayStation, though. Within days of putting out that video, more of my sources reached out to me after doing more digging on their own, and through follow-up conversations, I was able to become 100% sure that it was an Xbox APU. That's why I relabeled the video, too, so that if you were looking through my history, you wouldn't click on a video thinking it was for a PS6 and then be confused when you hear that it's for an Xbox, so that if you click on it, at least you know what you're getting into, even if, again, I was a bit sloppy, and I apologize for that. But you see, I also want to mention that, much more importantly, about a month after that original messy Xbox video, I put out what I think is probably the biggest leak out of this channel, at least this year, and that is that a Zen 2 moment is happening with AMD APUs. Really, if you've missed that video, you really should watch that, whether you're interested in PC gaming or console gaming, because it sets up some pretty important factors that are going into the Xbox Magnus, because, well, next generation, AMD's dedicated graphics cards and their APUs, including Xbox Magnus, they all share chiplets. That has profound implications for economy of scale, and this is going to be a necessary factor in if Xbox Magnus and RDNA 5 dedicated graphics card can succeed next gen, for the following reasons. Now, look, I can't confirm everything that is in a recent leak out of Kepler from Twitter. You know, I don't know if the 10 million number about some deal with AMD and Microsoft wasn't met, and so that's why it fell apart. But what I can say is the gist of some recent leaks regarding the cancellation of a custom Xbox handheld APU, the gist of it is correct to my knowledge. I do happen to know on my own, through my own sources, that there was a semi-custom APU that was going to be used in the Xbox handheld, and that actually it would use ARM cores, but that it just wasn't worth it to Microsoft to do so. Now, I didn't get an exact number or many follow-up details as to why, but you can infer that they just were worried it wouldn't sell enough to be worth it. And so I can back up at least most of what Kepler said there. Well, so think about it. If Microsoft, or if AMD was annoyed at Microsoft, like canceling series production, not ordering enough APUs for them to think it's worth it to make a semi-custom part, well, that means that it is very important that Xbox Magnus shares parts with desktop RDNA 5, because this allows Microsoft to avoid the issue they're running into now with the series consoles, where they're basically been forced to cut production, and because they've been forced to cut production, it's raising prices. Not the case with Magnus. With Magnus, as long as it doesn't sell absolutely abysmally, because it shares most of its silicon with PC gaming parts, it can be justified to keep making it new, and that should help its longevity, even if it remains a fraction of the sales of the next-gen PlayStation. That's very important, right? That's important for a potential Xbox purchaser to know that even if it doesn't sell a ton, Microsoft can more easily afford to support it and keep manufacturing it long term. But you see, it's not just good for Xbox there. That also makes it very good for AMD, because now, even if it's just 5, 10, 15, 20 million additional dies, that does allow AMD to spread apart the cost of their mid-range die. It will now be shared with the console, and so that means it's cheaper per die to make, but then also, this kind of makes developers give you almost console-level optimizations to PC dedicated AMD graphics cards next generation. And so this whole situation of sharing chiplets between Xbox and dedicated AMD products next gen, this is just a win-win, where it will make things cheaper for both Microsoft and AMD, get better support for both Xbox and Radeon graphics cards. And yeah, again, check out that video if you want to see more about the economics and behind it and the other Magnus-like products coming out that aren't an Xbox next year. But I've wasted enough time. Let me finally get into the Xbox Magnus specs. All right. AMD Magnus, the APU, in the next generation Xbox console. So it will be composed of two chiplets. One of them is a 144mm squared SoC die that will be made on TSMC N3P. And I actually have seen N3P specifically mentioned in documentation by now, so I do believe that's the node it is using. And it's an SoC die in that it has the CPU cores, the video out, and the AI engine. Now, In addition to that, of course, it is connected to a 264mm squared GPU die. This is the die that will be shared with desktop Radeon products, and that will be on either N3C or N3P. I still haven't heard firmly which one they're going to go with for the desktop Radeon APU chiplets. And in total, comes to 408mm squared. Now, as for TDP, I believe, and it is just a belief, that they will target around 250 to 350 watts. So you're still looking at something that's like, I don't know, 20 to like 60, 70% more power consumption than actually the PS6. So a lot more power than the PS6, but I still believe they will try to get this within form factors that can be considered traditional consoles. So using more energy than a PS4 or a PS6 for sure, but probably not using radically more energy than like a launch PS3 at peak power usage or something. They're going to want this to be cost effective and not chug too much energy. That is my belief, though. I don't know that for sure. Next, it will have 68 RDNA 5 compute units disabled down from a maximum of 70. I've seen speculation out there. Technically, I've already confirmed 70 CUs, but I'm going to do it again here. 70. 100% sure. Multiple sources. People speculating that it's 72 or something. Wrong, wrong, wrong. It's 70 compute units, right? And then they disable 2 of those. Now, that is comprised, and this is really interesting about RDNA 5, of 4 shader engines. Most console gamers, you can ignore this section, but for the technical PC enthusiast dorks out there, a lot of you, I think, will find this fascinating. I have had this verified by multiple sources. 4 shader engines. 3 of the shader engines, like 3 of the quadrants of the design, have 9 work groups. That means 18 compute units. And then there's another lopsided shader engine with just 8 work groups or 16 compute units. And each of these shader engines has 2 shader arrays. Now, I can't tell you much more than that, but it does seem like there's something going on here with however they've designed RDNA 5. And I believe they've already talked about that they can do this with previous RDNA generations as well, but like they can have lopsided shader engines. You don't have to have everything symmetrical, and it won't be with Xbox Magnus. Now, the GPU will have at least 24 megabytes of L2 cache. I'm just basing that on what I've seen from desktop Radeon graphics cards that will share this chiplet. I don't know the maximum amount of L2, but it will have 24. By the way, for those keeping track, 24 megabytes, that is almost 5 times the L2 that was in the Xbox Series X. And so while it does not have infinity cache, it has wildly more L2 cache and much faster RAM. And so I do not think this thing will be bandwidth constrained at all. It has effectively just a boatload more bandwidth than the current generation of consoles. Now, one thing that they didn't go insane with, although I do think will be more than enough for PC gaming, is they have 3 Zen 6 cores. Now, remember, these are 3 nanometer N3P cores. These won't be clocked as fast as the N2X desktop, cores that will be found in like $800 gaming processors, but they're still going to be pretty fast. They get 3 of those. They will be faster than the ones in the PlayStation 6 Orion or the Handheld. And then it will also have 8 Zen 6C cores with 12 megabytes of L3. Now, I say up to, by the way, because I don't know if one of the Zen 6 nor one of the Zen 6C cores, or maybe one of each, are disabled. I do think there's a chance that it will be in total a 9-core CPU that's just faster than the 9 cores in the PS6, but technically it could be up to 11. I don't know if they disable any of the CPU cores, although I did know that they disable part of the GPU. And then the memory controller, 192-bit memory bus with up to 48 gigabytes of GDDR7. For those keeping track, that means that I believe they could go with probably 24 or like 36 or 48 gigabytes of RAM, right? Yeah, I believe that's how that would work, right? Because, 24, 36, or 48. I would hope they go with 48 gigabytes of RAM, because if this is meant to run PC games, you're going to want to, have something like, I don't know, like, what would that be, like 16 plus 32 for like 16 gigabytes of VRAM, 32 gigabytes of system. So that's what I hope they go with. But technically, I don't know the final RAM amount they will select, and they probably don't quite yet either. Now, this is interesting, and this might be unique compared to the PlayStations. This has an NPU, or AI engine, whatever you want to call it, with up to 110 tops when it's operating at 6 watts, but then it also has a low power NPU mode for 46 tops to still meet Microsoft Copilot requirements that uses much less energy at 1.2 watts. I'm not sure why they are worried about 2 power consumption modes, but Assume it has something to do with budgeting more energy for the NPU versus the CPU at times. And I don't know what they will do with this. And technically, if you think about the PlayStation 6 consoles, I still don't know 100% if they do or don't have an NPU. Although I've been talking with developers, and a lot of them think that it would make sense for the PlayStation 6 consoles to just, much like the PS5 Pro, have a ton of TOPS built into the GPU that it can run off of that and that it doesn't need an NPU. I don't know. We'll find out. But what I do know is Microsoft has a fairly powerful, likely XDNA 3 NPU in Magnus, and so they will probably want to use that for running some operations in parallel to the GPU running the pixels. And then finally, it is targeting a 2027 launch, and I want to be clear that since the recent Xbox Magnus videos and RDNA 5 videos I have put out there, I've heard from even more sources that Microsoft is talking to partners behind the scenes and just openly saying 2027. 2027 is when Xbox Magnus launches. And all right, now that I'm through that, what do I have to say about this information? Well, I will admit that I do not know final clock targets, if you'll notice, of the graphics or the CPU portion of this APU, unlike with the PlayStation 6 consoles, where I did know the final clock speed targets. And so there's some room for variance here, right? If this thing, Xbox Magnus, pushes itself to 350 watts or more, with the GPU clocking above 3 gigahertz, the CPU core, at least a few of them, clocking above 6 gigahertz, yeah, look, I think that would end up notably faster than PlayStation 6 Orion. However, even in extreme scenarios, I don't think it will be more than about a third faster than the PlayStation 6 console. And so don't forget that even in an extreme situation, the next gen Xbox, though faster, is probably less of a difference than even Xbox One X to PS4 Pro. So most true console gamers probably won't care if they're gaming on a big screen TV on a couch. And remember that there is a chance they might clock this lower to keep power consumption low. I think they did that too much with the Series X, and that's one of the reasons it lost in performance overall versus the PS5. They made that mistake before. Who knows? Maybe they'll make it again. Like if the Zen 6 cores only go up to 5.5 gigahertz, if the GPU is limited to 2.4 gigahertz, and then the PS6 hits 3 gigahertz, well, in that situation, I think it would just be like Xbox Series X versus PS5 all over again, with Sony not really having a disadvantage in specs versus Xbox, and possibly even having a net advantage overall. But on average, I do expect Xbox Magnus to basically be a more premium version of the same performance you would get from a PS6. Like, for example, if a given PS6 game was running 4K 120 with ray tracing on, and of course it would also have FSR4, something to get there, I would suspect that Magnus would, instead of doing 4K 120, do like 4K 144. Like, it could do 20% higher frame rates, which doesn't matter on a big screen TV, really, but does matter if you're gaming on a monitor on your desk, which Magnus will be more meant for than the PlayStation, and then maybe allow you to turn up a couple settings or something. So, yeah, that's how I look at Magnus versus the PlayStation. Roughly same performance, but will give PC gamers stuff they would appreciate that could outperform the PS6, but probably only in scenarios PC gamers would care about. And let me say one more time, that thing better have 36 or at least 48 or at least 36 gigabytes of RAM if this thing is going to function like a full Windows device with Steam and Microsoft Office app support. Which, yeah, on that last note, I want to say this too. If the next gen Xbox does not let you run at least a full-ish version of Windows with support for other PC game launchers and apps, I do say that I think they will do that. I said that in the beginning of the video. I'm saying it again. But if they don't do that, I do think it will be a massive failure. I just do. Sorry, this thing is going to cost more than the PlayStation 6, and it directly shares parts with RDNA 5 graphics cards meant for desktop. To not give that extra value proposition, to allow you to run Steam, to allow you to run other apps on Windows, I don't know how they would justify a higher cost in the PlayStation 6 unless they do that, and I think it would be a complete fail. And actually, this gets me to the point that I want to close on for this video. So recently, Xbox founder Laura Fryer put out a video on YouTube that touched on, well, why she believes the Xbox brand is failing, and also the things that she had to work through when she worked there. And one of the things that stuck out to me, it was very interesting, she said that Xbox always had this weakness against Nintendo and Sony, and that the Xbox people were just, or their company just wasn't as good at finding ways to optimize the manufacturing of the console throughout the generation and get it to cost less to produce by the end of it, right? Most consoles launch with a slight loss to maybe a slight profit at the beginning, and then over time, they find more effective and efficient ways to manufacture it. And by the end of the generation, it doesn't even matter if they're selling a ton of games, they're making a profit on each console sold. She said that she felt that Xbox was never as good at doing that as Nintendo or Sony was. And if we're being honest, there's only 3 ways you get around that sort of deficit in manufacturing, right, against your competition. The first way you make up for that is if you just have a brand that's as powerful as Nintendo's and frankly can get away with overcharging for weaker hardware because people aren't buying it for the specs. They're buying it for unique gimmicks and games that only your console offers. That's how Nintendo gets around this issue. But then there's the other way to get around it, and it is what Sony just does. They are a master of hardware manufacturing. They are the best at efficiently designing smaller dies to get higher performance in the competition and finding ways to have their supply chain just work like a clock. That's the other way you get around this. Just be the best at it. But then there's a third option, and that's simply leveraging your software advantage to make your more expensive to manufacture hardware feel like you're getting more if you have to pay more. And so what do we all here think? Come on, Microsoft is most likely to be able to do. Well, I can tell you what, I don't think they're ever going to be as creative as Nintendo, and I do not also think Microsoft will ever be as good at hardware manufacturing as Sony, a storied hardware company that's been around for decades. They're just not going to do that as well. And so for sakes, Microsoft, you are a software company. Do the software the best, and that is what will allow Xbox to compete more effectively with Nintendo and Sony. The only way Xbox is ever going to survive is if they have tons of great games that you can only get on Microsoft or play best on Microsoft, and then you offer software features the competition can't compete with, like having some version of full Windows on your console. Sony will never be able to do that. Nintendo will never be able to do that. But I tell you what, Nintendo will be more creative. Sony will be better at manufacturing. And so Microsoft, you have to leverage your strengths. Microsoft needs to learn the right lessons from their past mistakes with Xbox. And they need to do it quickly. Because I got to say, I don't know about all of you, but this is starting to feel like the end of the Xbox 360 gen all over again. You know, they started off the 360 gen just like they started off the Series X generation really strong, but then around the end of the generation, they started doing basically everything they could to alienate and lose their fans before having an Xbox One moment that basically lost in the console market until now. And they almost claimed it back, but then they're pulling an N360 moment all over again. So wake up, Microsoft. Stop waging war on PC gamers. Stop forgetting what your console gamers want and get your act together. Microsoft, I am sure, Xbox Magnus is your last chance to save the brand, and I hope you do to a degree because, boy, it would be a pity if something that looked this pretty just ended up in the dustbin of history.